and Evan.
What is up, Shady Sports Network? I'm back here with a extremely exclusive and special episode. When I say exclusive, this is like OnlyFans content right here. They're not gonna get this anywhere.
Chris, you freaky.
Wow.
So we have a great lineup of guests here. We have a XFL Jim over there. Love your content. First time on screen. We have Mark right here. We have Evan, who is way more professional and ready than I am. A lot of respect. He works for the Las Vegas Nighthawks of the IFL. We got Pierce Christian. I believe he's at Utah Tech right now. And then we got Kenyon. He's down there in the great state of Ohio. And then we got Michael at the top corner from the unique state of Maine. That's what I'll say.
Unique.
So I'll start with you, Michael. I'll start with you. I want to know what you think, Michael, because you've been like all over about this XFL USFL.
So as most everybody knows, the XFL USFL news broke earlier today, like around 11 o'clock-ish or so, that the XFL and USFL are in advanced talks for a merger of sorts. Not sure the specifics of the details. Things have been trickling out over the course of the last, 12 hours or so. Basically, it sounds like the XFL approached the USFL, which kind of surprised me. It was the Redbird Capital that supposedly reached out to USFL to talk about the merger. It sounds like the XFL's capital is more than the USFL's capital, but the USFL's TV contract is appealing to the XFL side of things, and they feel like that they can work together to possibly brand this and put this together. Obviously, there's other specs that are involved with this because the USFL has a labor union, the XFL does not, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, at this point in time, it sounds like it's going to get announced at some point in time this week. I have a ton of thoughts on this, but I want to start with somebody. I haven't talked to XFL Jim. This is the first time I've talked to him. This is the first time I've talked to Evan. And Pierce, real quick, man, with the haircut and everything going on there, you reminded me of the dude from Stranger Things, just to let you know. So I just wanted to let you know that's what I thought was on for a second. I was like, got really excited there. So
that's not the first.
Yeah. So XFL Jim, man, I follow you on Twitter. I do have you there. What are your thoughts with this? Sam is coming in here and joining us here shortly. But what are your thoughts on this, man? And where are you on this? Are you excited about this?
I'm 1,000% excited. The gyms are in a very tumultuous time at the moment. It's an exciting time. I liked the separation of the leagues to an extent. I liked how each one was sort of unique. I hope they can keep that. But this moment in particular excites me because one thing I love to do with any news of the XFL, USFL, I love to speculate. I love to just make wild predictions that most obviously from someone like me, usually not true, but I love to make them regardless. And this is the perfect time to just throw out wild speculation and just see what sticks. It's so fun. There's just so much unknown still.
Yeah, no doubt. That's something that's definitely I think that's what a lot of people are doing in this situation when it comes to this in the world of spring football, because this changes everything. In the sense of what we've seen, two major sports, football specifically, spring leagues coming together, creating a massive 16-team league at this situation. Assuming they stay at 16 teams, obviously there's a lot that goes on with it as well. Evan, we're going to come to you. Like I said, this is the first time I've talked to you as well. What are your thoughts, man? I mean, this is big news. It's news that we knew was eventually going to come. I don't think any of us necessarily predicted it would become this soon, though.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and I'm on the side of things where, I maybe didn't expect it as much ever. I thought, egos would get in the way, but it was never out of the question. It was never out of the question, and obviously, this is seems to be rapidly advancing. But, I'm excited, and, I have a lot of questions too. I'm really interested, I think, more than anything, to see how the teams are managed, if they're really going to keep 16 teams in this deal or if they're looking to downsize, get rid of certain markets. We all know what's gone on with Vegas, with the Vipers, and obviously Houston would have 2 teams between the Gamblers and the Roughnecks. So something's going to have to happen there, I think. But yeah, it's a changing time, and I'm not against it. I think it'll be easier to follow one league, and there will be more competition with more teams, and more games per weekend on a slate. But really interested to see how they figure out the logistics, especially if they're planning on getting this done, prior to the 2024 season. How is that all going to work out? Because I can tell you right now, there's a very long list of things that they're going to need to get done to make this happen in time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's a lot on the plate to figure out as well. Kenyon, you're a player. You're a player. How from a player's perspective, how does this feel to you? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I like it. I'm always a little bit of a razzle dazzle type of guy. So for new stuff like
feel
that,
that.
I love it. So I feel like everything is just gonna mesh together, and it's gonna be a beautiful thing. And once they all mesh together, someone needs to give me a call. That's all I need. That's all I got to say.
Definitely. We'll try to get you back outdoors. Mark, thoughts, man? I mean, you were on the spring football reports with us, a good chunk of the spring. And I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's, from a long-term standpoint, it's a great thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we want the leagues to last, and we want this to be a staple in the sports landscape. So I think this is, I don't know if I'm with Heaven, the aspect of this actually happening this upcoming season seems like a very daunting task to me. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they announce it and they almost treat it as like, okay, cool. Like, who's going to be the champion the last season for each league alone? And then, going into next year, there's some hype. But I think overall, it'll be nice. It's a great way to also establish and plant some seeds to grow and basically increase the number of teams in the long term as well. The only downside, I think Sam and I were talking about it just on Twitter earlier, was like less football. So football probably, if you have 2 seasons that kind of merge together, we're not going into the beginning of July. So, I mean, obviously, we'll transition to the CFL, the ELF, everything else, but USFL and XFL will kind of condense some of our games here.
So you mentioned July. July 1st was apparently the day that Redbird Capital, or rumored that Redbird Capital, reached out to the USFL to talk about this possible merger, or at least get the ball rolling. Pierce, with it being July, and now that we're in the middle of September and this news is finally broken, how far in advance? Because the XFL, to me, has been the way more active league in the offseason than the USFL has, as far as social media content, doing the showcases, draft, whatever it may be. How far in advance do you think that these talks have gotten, and do you think they could prepare? Because Mark brought up a good point. They may not be ready with everything still going on to iron out for 2024. Do you think it's possible they ironed out a chunk of that so we see that this next year?
It's gonna be interesting. I think it's hard to, because future run, we all know this is a great decision. Overall, it's hard to see what the first season's gonna look like. That's why the speculation of how many teams are we gonna get? How are the hubs gonna work this year? There's a lot of questions that are gonna go into this first season. I feel like marketing isn't even a big piece of that pie yet. I think USFL and XFL, their marketings are so unique themselves, some better than others. So I think just marketing in its own right, I feel like it will be better typically. But I feel like there's a lot more bigger things going into this merger than just the marketing. I feel like they're going to have to figure out what do we do with the players, because I've seen that people want to just kind of blow everything up and just do a draft with everyone again. And then we have the teams and the hubs. There's just a lot of questions and speculations that are going to go into this merger. It's hard to really tell for that particular marketing.
Yeah. Krish, you said that you had some some big things that you needed to say when we were getting off over there at the goal line stand. So go have at it, man. Let's hear it.
So, welcome everyone. It's a lovely night here in Massachusetts. You know, I've been kind of calm, on camera lately, kind of, reel back a little bit. Said some things, made some people mad. I'm just here so I don't get fined. But on this particular night, I'm gonna say what I have to say. I'm gonna lay the meat down. I'm gonna feed the hungry. So essentially, a couple months ago when we did SFR, I said that the USFL and the XFL should merge. Pierce was on that show. Travis, who hasn't been, I don't even know what Travis is, but he hasn't been on the show. I said it, and I said, and everyone started laughing. They started letting out the, Colorado laugh, all these different kinds of laughs they got. But I knew I was right. Because when I say what I say, I know it has truth to it. And I look at this today, and I saw it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm not surprised. Perfect move for both leagues. Because people egos finally realize that they can't succeed alone. I'm XFL. I'm Team XFL all the way. I rooted on a USFL downfall. I hated the USFL. I started to like it at the end of the year. I started to kind of realize, okay, maybe I can try to mess with the USFL, because that's the only thing on TV, whatever. The USFL did this to survive. This is their only option to survive. Otherwise, they would done. They know that. We know that. Playing in your little hub cities in front of two people, that's not going to work. So they were like, all right, Dwayne, they picked up the phone, gave Dwayne a little ring, and he picked up, and it's going to work out for them. They are not going to regret this decision. This is a safe move for them. This is the only move. Otherwise, it would have been like the AAF, and so I'm really happy that I called it. I saw the future. I knew what was coming. And I stay informed. I stay informed. I stay up to date. I read stuff, and I kind of consume and read. And it turns out I was right. And I think I know the XFL community right now they're standing under me, and they're like, oh my God, Chris, you called it. And the USFL community is coming to me. So either or, as long as the one person says, hey, he knows what he was talking about. I write that down. I keep receipts. I'm so happy. Let's go.
Chris.
That leads me into what I love to talk about is what are like the XFL and USFL haters gonna do?
Yep. That's the
because that's one of my favorite parts about the whole the double league system is I love hating on the USFL, and I know USFL Jim loves hating on the XFL. It's a great part of the whole zeitgeist.
Oh, they'll still hate on each other. Trust me, it's gonna happen.
It's not nothing different.
I'll make it happen. I'm gonna keep it alive. It's gonna happen.
Chris, the only thing that's wrong with your little thing is the USFL didn't reach out to the XFL. It was the XFL who reached out to the USFL.
Yeah, they reached out to them.
I need receipt for that.
Nah, they're just trying to help. Chris, I got your back. They're just trying to help out the USFL. I got you. I got you, man. Exactly. I got your back.
Exactly. You don't know what was said behind the scenes. There's a bunch of things. Look on Reddit. Look on Discord. You can find many things. And
Investigator Jim's on the case. We got this. I got you.
Discord. Discord could be relentless, especially those USFL guys. It could be relentless.
We did not need Jim to feed into Krish over there. Sam, you're the only one that hasn't said something yet other than me as far as my thoughts are concerned on this. This news broke. You sent it in the chat. We definitely were very much shocked, and a lot of things sent through. We've discussed it in general that we knew that this merger was going to eventually happen. We just did not expect it this soon, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I think that we all had it in the back of our heads that it was inevitable at some point that most likely this merge would happen, but that's where Chris forgets that we all have context behind some of the stuff that we say when it comes to that. So we thought it might happen, just not tomorrow. And, we proved to be wrong, but like the Marcast said on Twitter today, nobody called this. Nobody saw this coming. And if they did, I feel like they're kind of fooling themselves even. And maybe they just got lucky because honestly, unless you were involved in these leagues, I don't think anybody saw this coming, especially if you're behind the scenes and all the little pokes and prods that you've seen from one side to the other. It's not like these leagues have, coexisted in a necessarily completely drama-free atmosphere between the two of them. I mean, we've all seen the real US or the real football ads from the USFL
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So, who are they poking fun at? It's not arena ball. Let's be honest, that's not their competitor. So, I'm just saying that it just seems odd that this comes up when it is right now because I didn't think they were prepared for this yet. But ultimately, I kind of wrestled with this thought all day. I originally went into it, as you guys know in our private chat, that I was not a fan of the move. The more I think about it, the more I think it might actually be a good thing. And it because of the fact that I feel that a larger league with, all these different broadcast partners, assuming that that's how it stays, you're going to get more casual fans drawn in because there's more teams to like, there's more markets you're covering, and on top of that, it's on large television broadcast channels. So I think that there's a better chance for the league to succeed and grow over time if it's one league. And like Evan said, it's going to be a little bit easier to cover. And then you've got large entities all across the world, covering it because you've got, you know, international markets covering USFL and the XFL at this point.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep my little thing. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, but I'm going to pose a lot of things that I've been thinking about over the course of the day, and then you guys can have at it and do whatever you want with it, knowing Chris will find a way to twist it and turn it and then come back 6 months from now and say, I called it. But basically, I've been tearing with. So part of me hates this, and I hate it primarily because I feel it's too early. It's too soon. Because you're basically putting, I mean, granted, you're doubling your assets, you're doubling this, you're bringing one thing that one side lacks, and the other side is strong in, and vice versa into it, whether it's the capital or the media side of things. So that part of it, like, I'm okay with, in the sense of it doubling its assets, but I feel it's too soon. I feel like it's legitimately jumping into bed with a competitor, because either a panic situation or, I mean, let's face it, if the capital on the XFL side is where it really is, then it's not. The XFL wasn't in danger, and maybe the USFL need to get the ball rolling. I'm not 100% sure, but here are some thoughts that I do like, and this is the part of me that loves this. 16 teams now, assuming that they keep all 16. One of the teams in Houston's got to go. We don't know what's going to happen there. Assuming it's going to be the Roughnecks that's going to move, because you're talking about the possibility of the Gamblers probably staying in with the USFL, considering the history there, right? And then on top of that as well, you have Vegas that doesn't have a home right now, right? So that's the key component there, right? What's going to happen with that? But 16 teams at the same time, you're also talking about they can extend the schedule now. You can run one hub in the West, one hub in the East, and do that hybrid hub that that Arlington did with the XFL, and then fly them out that way and only cross games a few times, and you can extend the schedule to 14 game schedule, right? You saw it with the ELF this year when they went to 17 games. They went from a 10 game schedule to a 14 game schedule, and it worked, or a 13 game schedule, and it worked out fairly well for them. So if they find a way to do this and they're able to get the venues locked in, you could still see a little bit of an extension of a season, and they don't have to strict to 10 games. On top of this, it brings Disney and Fox together to show the media side, right? So Fox and Disney, two big, sports, worlds, whatever. NBC is kind of the odd man out here. I don't think NBC is going to be able to continue doing what they were doing with the USFL if that's the case. But what this does do is the XFL is able to fulfill their 5-year contract with Disney. At the end of that 5 years, if they really wanted to, Fox can leverage the league because Fox is going to be able to show the games. They own a stake in the league if this merger happens. So they can actually leverage and find a way to get more money out of Disney, or they could sell the media rights back to NBC. It's a media right future war for the sports, where we all know when Vince McMahon brought the XFL back in 2020, his goal was 5 years, we'll pay all the production costs because I want a media production battle or negotiation at the end of that contract. That's what he wanted. And that's kind of what's happening with this. And I think it's good for the league because it gives the USFL, or at least Fox, leverage against Disney if Disney wants to continue to show the product. Now, I don't know if that's not 100% necessarily what they're thinking of at this moment, but it does kind of create this media like bidding war in 5 years. So some good things long term, like you said, Sam, and like everybody said here, Mark, especially when he was talking about the future. But I just feel like overall, Houston is going to have to move. Vegas is going to have to stay in the West. They're going to have to find a bridge gap for Seattle, though. I mean, even if they do a hybrid hub, I still feel like Seattle's a little bit out of geography's way there if they don't find a city to bridge them. I know, a lot, but have at it. I don't care. There's a lot there.
That's what I'm saying, though. There's so much to talk about and speculate. This is the best. It's so fun.
There really is so much. I mean, one question that we haven't even really talked about, and it's one of the main things that is really kind of, I want to see how it'll work, but we have the USFL, which unionized, and then we have the XFL, which voted against unionizing. So how does that work? Does the USFL keep with their union, their business model, and then the XFL has their union list teams and their business model? I don't know how that is all going to jive up. But one other point that Krish made off camera that I specifically want to get Evan's take on. For those who don't know, Evan works with the Vegas Nighthawks of the IFL, so he has an innate knowledge on what this or how this could possibly affect him as a person looking for players. So Krish brought up the fact that if they move to the February to May time period, we saw some XFL players playing in the IFL after the season ended this season. Do you, as a person looking for players, do you start contacting XFL players as soon as the season ends, or are you, kind of trying to lay those seeds long before the season begins? Or how does that affect the indoor football league? Let's put it that way.
It's a good question. I think it goes both ways. I think, if there's a guy that's, in another league that I would want to come and play on my team, I would try and establish that connection, well beforehand, and not just get in contact after the XFL season is over and kind of rush things. But, there are certain players that might be available after the season that you don't expect. Guys get released quickly. Obviously, other guys are going to go to the NFL still, at least some of them anyway. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and I definitely would consider looking at those players. And again, I think the bigger thing for me here is there will be players available one way or another, but it goes back to my point about whether or not they decide to keep all 16 teams, because if they downsize, let's say they go to 12 teams, which is my, I guess, best guess as to how many there would be, or the number that I feel good about, you're removing 4 teams, altogether. And that means, 4 rosters that are now available as free agents. And obviously some of those guys from the teams that maybe are removed, go to other teams in this new league. But there's just going to be some guys that end up, as free agents, and they don't get picked up by, another team, after, I guess all, the teams have been cut or whatever. So then you kind of take that pool of guys that are, free agents, and it doesn't look like they're going to get picked up again. You take those guys, and those are the ones you kind of sort through. So that's another thing as well that I wanted to point out.
There's so much to unpack with this. I mean, we haven't even talked about what the potential impact on the CFL could be. And, we saw a couple guys jump from the XFL to the CFL, a couple of guys from the USFL try to make the same move. So, honestly, that's another thing we could see pop up as well more often if we're going to the XFL time period, because then you're not overlapping at all with the CFL, which is just a whole nother complete, rabbit hole we could go down. So, with that being said, is there anything topic-wise in terms of questions you guys have that you want to discuss?
I mean, I'll point out, one of the aspects of the XFL that was really emphasized was a league of opportunity. So what Evan was just talking about is if we're if we're doing a merger and we're seeing less teams potentially and more player, like, isn't that eliminating opportunity? Like, how do they kind of spin that to say that we're kind of condensing and downsizing rosters? Are we not downsizing rosters? Like, that whole piece to me seems very questionable and would seem like if we were going to do less teams potentially, that would be going against the XFL's original core values of this reboot.
This is one of the main reasons why I'm struggling with the merger this soon. Is it's either you're going to have to downsize or you're rolling out 16 teams, which means what are you going to do? Because even though you're doubling your assets, you're also doubling your expenditures, right? So your expenses. So now you have your roster. Supposedly it's a merger of equal opportunity or equal balance or whatever the hell that was they were spinning on the on Twitter or whatever. But it makes me question, what are you going to do with that? If you stay at 16, do you shell out a little bit more money to extend the season to give guys a little more of a chance to head into camps, so it's not such a layoff coming for May? Do you go into June possibly? Stuff like that. And that's really kind of where I wish they would have waited until they made money. I mean, the XFL lost 60 million. The USFL, I think, supposedly turned a profit or had some kind of good revenue this year or something. But they're going to have to go to a hybrid system because the USFL aspect of it, they couldn't afford to stick with the hubs again. Like, there was just no way. Fans were getting frustrated with it across the board. And then on top of that, as well, is if you do a hybrid, what two cities are you going to put them in, and how are you going to go about the scheduling and stuff? I mean, there's so much that you have to speculate. And I know that it makes Jim very happy over there in the corner, but it's it's still just they need to iron out these details if they're going to set it up for the 2024 season. And like you, Mark, I'm questioning whether or not they'll be able to do it for 2024. 2025 is probably more likely, but they got a bunch of other things they need to figure out with their own leagues too.
That's what I was wondering as well. I was wondering if they announce the merger and set a date for 2025 and then just play out the end of each individual season next year in 2024.
Well, I imagine this merger is also going to keep the USFL name. I mean, let's face it, between the two names, the USFL has a much richer history. The name probably actually is more valuable than the XFL name. I mean, everybody's like, the USXFL, and I'm like, that's just stupid and dumb, and let's not do it. But I mean, who the hell knows? It just, I feel like a rebranding of this league for the XFL to jump in and just willingly give it over to the USFL. I mean, egos are played. It's really weird. Maybe they rebrand it all as a whole. I don't know, but I just feel like the USFL has way more history. The name means more because of that history. Even with this version of it, I don't know. That's why that's the part of me that I hate, because it just feels like it's too soon.
I'm keeping the XFL. I'm not changing. I refuse. Well, I don't care what happens.
Yeah, hey, that's fair too. I mean,
Rest in peace, Jousters.
I don't think that name's coming. We'll see. There's been some speculation for sure. Jim, what's your biggest speculation coming from this entire situation?
My biggest speculation is I can't wait to figure out. I'm gonna just spend all night tonight and probably tomorrow figuring out how I would tinker with the rules of each league and how I can get them to work coexisting. I want it so bad. I want to have a whole layout of how both leagues' rules can work together to create the ultimate product.
All right. I'm definitely going to be in on watching that for sure.
I want it so bad.
I want to see you get the whiteboard, just start drawing all over the place.
I've got Investigator Jim on the case, so there's going to be I got him digging into how this deal went down, and then I've got both USFL and XFL Jim having a sit down and kind of going over everything. So there's a lot in the works. I'm excited for the rules. I'm excited to see what they do with roster sizes, and like Mike was talking about, I'm excited to see if they do like a hybrid system. Will they do some teams with hubs, others with not? There's just so much up in the air. My mind is just filled. It's an exciting time right now. Even I'm saying with Michael, I'm not super. I liked both leagues separate. I liked being able to like have XFL time and USFL time, but this is still wild, crazy, and exciting.
It was definitely needed at some point in time. I mean, let's be honest.
I was thinking like 5 years down the line, though, like 5 or 6 years down the line. I was thinking like near 2028, we'd be like really seriously discussing mergers, and then to have it happen after like 1 year of the new XFL and 2 years of the new USFL seems crazy to me.
Yeah, and that's really the biggest thing, because like neither team is really profiting a large margin if the USFL did profit last year, and on top of that, like the capital behind the XFL, I'm not worried about that. So they definitely have more capital coming in. It's just when you're doing this, you're doubling your assets, you're doubling your expenses, but now you have to iron out certain details. And is it too soon? Like whether it's 2024 or 2025, is it too soon? I would have liked to see both leagues at least start churning profit on a little more consistent basis, and then possibly talking about expansion, which is the reason why that leads to them talking to each other. Like expansion after the first year of the XFL and expansion after year 2 of the USFL just seems like way too quick, rapid movement. We see it with indoor leagues a lot, in arena leagues. Like when you expand way too fast, it becomes an issue. And these leagues don't have the same financial structure that the NFL does, right? It's the league-owned teams. It's not individual teams like the ELF has or the NFL has. Like it's not certain owners per team. So this is the part where I struggle with it, and I really keep my fingers crossed that it's not too much too soon. Even if it's 2025, it still feels too soon, personally.
That's fair to a certain extent. I'm curious to get all your guys' thoughts. I mean, my question is, if they're doing this early, is it not kind of a red flag in terms of what both leagues see for their future? I mean, to me, you do this as a last resort, right? Or not necessarily a last resort. I mean, obviously both leagues want to stand on their own 2 feet, right? So if you're doing something like this and you're seriously considering it, I feel like it's for a reason. And maybe it's a reason that none of us really want to admit, but maybe there was no long-term future for either of these leagues if they didn't merge. And that's definitely where I want to get your guys' thoughts, because I know that's something that's been brought up, but is that reality? Were we headed to a world where we had no spring football once again?
That's a world that I would not want to live in. I'm just going to flat out say that. I would go crazy. And I have thought about it, and it's kept me up at night. As soon as the news originally came that the XFL lost $60 million on the season, I didn't sleep for 2 days. I was devastated. And then obviously you dig in more, their capital's fine. And there's a part of it that worries. I think this might just be like an opportune time where they're trying to like maybe push some things, and they see this as their moment to kind of capitalize on. There's at least a decent amount of hype for each league at the moment. They don't know where they'd be in a few years from now, so who knows? Maybe they're just thinking we got to do this now. I think they're rushing things a little bit, but maybe in their head they're just like, this is the moment. And who knows, with like the new TV deals and streaming and everything coming crazy. You see it in college football all the time. New TV deals are insane. I wonder, we see a little bit of that with spring football. It's a little similar when I'm looking at all the college, like different conferences and what they're doing to seize opportunities versus these leagues. It's all a gamble.
UAC football, baby.
No doubt.
Mark, I saw you being very animate down there. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about Sam's question. You were.
Yeah, so for me personally, I think that this has been a thought process for both leagues. Primarily, I think the XFL has been a lot more open to this concept than the USFL. I think the USFL has kind of been locked in on their own thing, and One has a very conservative approach towards their league and being frugal with their money, and another has taken a very extreme kind of approach and spending a lot of money. It's a nice meeting of a minds, a nice balance, but it almost feels like, to me, this is going to sound kind of crazy. It's almost like The Rock just kind of like had an epiphany over these last couple months, like kind of like that oh shit moment, like what did I get myself into type of thing. And it seems like he's actively working the streets right now. Like he's having a lot of backdoor conversations. Who knows what types of conversations have actually transpired behind closed doors. So it just seems like there's been a lot of movement that we have no idea about that will probably come out in the long term. And this has been, even though it's news now, it's been conversations in the making for quite some time.
When do you think they started like discussing it and planning it out?
Remember they had the post league. I feel like for me it was like, hey, XFL season's over. XFL meeting of the minds. Oh shit, what do? We lost a shit ton of money, type of thing. But I think the USFL is also like, hey, our season ended, and we are kind of in a weird spot with our game plan for how we're going to grow our league too. So I think they've kind of set their egos aside a little bit, personally.
I don't know if it's necessarily. Yeah, I don't know if it's actually a red flag though, Sam, in the sense of the merger happening, primarily because I think that the XFL, when they came into it and the USFL, was going. I think eventually, even eternally, they kind of both knew that eventually something was going to have to give, whether it was a merger of sorts or one of them was just going to end up burying the other one, right? Mark mentioned the 60 million that they lost, and I don't honestly think, I mean, that might be a little bit more than they wanted to or projected to or whatever it may be, but with the way that the XFL was going about their strategy of marketing and everything else, it was not a surprise that they lost that, because that was something that they were trying to do. That's what they wanted to do. They knew that spending money makes money in the long term. And I think that eventually they would have recouped a lot of that back. So I don't think from a financial standpoint that the XFL was like, oh my God, panicked at 60 million. Let's go merge with the USFL. I just honestly think it might be one of those situations where they kind of looked at it from a statistic standpoint long term. And we're like, if we can pull this merger off now and we can do this now, then we can absolutely 100% keep the stability of spring football alive in the long term. I'm just surprised with the branding side of things that they were able to put their egos aside to come up with whatever it may be, whether it's a new name or they keep one name over the other. That's the one thing that is going to probably be the most surprising to me when this is officially announced, because let's make it clear, this still has not been officially announced. So this is still all technically speculation. I mean, we could come into this in November and still hear they're on the verge and nothing ever come from it. So let's keep that in mind as well.
I mean, the thing for me is like money talks. And if anything is going to change someone's mind, it's putting money in front of someone and saying, how much do you like this? Because there very well may be a business plan that was put on someone's desk that said, hey, if these two leagues merge, look how much money we can save.
Right.
If we have 8 cities with 2 teams in each city, you combine both of those, you cut the costs, virtually 33%. You have both teams can play each other twice per season or something like that. Like I could see a business plan that was too good of a business plan to not pass to pass up. And if both leagues saw that and they bought into it, that might be what they're looking at right now.
If Redbird Capital was the one that reached out, I will say that the eternal meeting after their championship game is where that business proposal was probably starting to kind of come together. And Redbird Capital is super successful. Danny Garcia and The Rock, super successful. I mean, let's face it. Those two, all three of those investors or owners in a league are extremely successful at what they do. But they also know that it didn't just happen overnight. So those three are definitely preparing, or those three owners were definitely preparing for a long-term situation with the XFL. So that's the reason why I don't think the financial side of it was, the 60 million loss was as like significant as people think it was. Because I mean, it's a lot of money to us, obviously. I mean, we look at 60 million and go, "Oh my god!" But when you're worth almost $1 billion, it's you're kind of like, whatever, that kind of sense. So I think that they probably laid out a business plan and they were like, if we can do it this way, X amount of teams, whatever it can be. And again, it goes back to the media rights too. That media package could be a huge deal breaker, money wise, in 5 years once that ESPN Disney contract's up. So
You have a great point there, Evan. You've been fairly quiet. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think this was their only path to survival long term?
I mean, there's been a lot of good points brought up. I don't know if it was their only option for survival, but there were a couple red flags for sure. I do remember when the report, I think, well, we back up a bit. The timing of this to me is a bit interesting because if you look, XFL had their championship game in mid-May, and then it was like sometime at the end of May or beginning of June, if I remember correctly, that the report came out after the XFL season saying the Rock had lost 60 million. From what we have gathered today, Redbird Capital reached out to the USFL on July 1st, so not much longer after all that had been announced. I definitely saw The Rock when that report came out. I definitely viewed that 60 million loss. I thought that was quite significant, and I did briefly think about what the future of the league was going to look like. I think for me, the biggest thing is I think what this tells me, what the merger tells me more than anything, is I knew that the XFL likely did not have a plan or significant funding beyond the 2024 season. This merger, that given that it's happening so fast, I think signals that perhaps maybe they didn't have funding even for parts of the 2024 season. We've seen them, after the season in 2023, they cut some significant jobs. And then recently, the development was you had position coaches moving from full-time roles into, seasonal or part-time roles. But it does go both ways, from the XFL perspective. I don't think it's, despite what we've been talking about, I don't think it's one league trying to cling on to the other. I think it's just the reality that, this is for the better of long-term success. But I've heard things on the other side. I've just talked a bit about the XFL and what I gathered from that, everything over the past couple months since the season's over. But, I was talking to a highly respected official, well, maybe not official, but, somebody in the football world who is at least highly respected and who I know very well, someone that has several connections upwards to the NFL level. And they did not believe that there would be a USFL season next year. And that person, has intel that would go beyond me. So, it does go on both sides. I think both leagues were at risk. I think both leagues realized they were going to have to make significant changes of some sort going into 2024 that would severely shake up their business models. And now you're in a situation where they've just both agreed that if they merge, it might be easier to figure out, some of those details, perhaps.
Mark brings up a point that I think we can all agree on right now. Currently,
For sure.
the USFL
Breakers,
is
baby.
definitely killing it in the merch game. Hashtag Breakers losing streak after Mark became a fan. But
They turned it around at the end.
they did.
So
You
true.
mean when we slaughtered you guys in the playoffs?
Oh boy, Stallions fans.
That's the one thing. Let's get into that. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's the one thing that to me is the most interesting part about this merger is we could potentially see a matchup like DC versus Birmingham, which I mean, DC
We beat
rolled
them.
through the XFL last season. Birmingham has been almost undefeated through their 2 seasons in the USFL. So I mean, talk about some really good football matchups and some really intriguing matchups overall if this merger ever does happen. I mean, that to me might be one of the biggest takeaways from everything. Chris, who are 2 teams you'd like to see play each other from the 2 leagues?
I want to hear this.
Well, Birmingham and obviously DC, like you said, would be really entertaining. It would be really interesting to see the competitive balance between these two leagues. Obviously, it would be different because a lot of players will mix, if they merge. One matchup that I would love to see would be the Vegas Vipers. Obviously, they won't be in Vegas, so I'll just call them the Vipers for purposes. But the Vipers versus the Michigan Panthers. That would be a really interesting matchup to me. The past year, the Michigan Panthers obviously were much improved from the year before. But I honestly think the Vipers, and this is my opinion, if the Vipers were in the USFL, they would have been in the playoffs and maybe even in the championship. That's how good I think the Vipers were. So I'm really interested to see this team this year.
I mean, their head coach got fired after they played, so I don't know how I felt about that, but that's just me.
I don't think it was technically fired. I think
He wasn't fired, or was he?
Parting of ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think at that level in the XFL, they know at the XFL level, they know such thing as being fired. It's more like
Basically.
Yeah.
Well, Pierce, what are two teams that you want to see play other than, of course, your Stallions versus the Defenders?
Well, yeah, I think it's too easy for that one, but I will say Stallions is going to beat everyone because they're just that good. And I just feel like the camaraderie of Birmingham is just too strong. It's a bit biased, obviously, but I just feel like they'd clean everyone. But if we're talking different, I think I'll pick two teams that kind of got heated up in the second half of the season respectfully, and I'll do Guardians and the Stars. Or the Panthers. You kind of flip between those two because they both, that very last game, they both could have easily won that game. Panthers obviously did. But the Guardians looked pretty good with Quinn Dormady hot, in the second half. He was doing pretty good. It would have been interesting to see how he would have done with, like, the Stars, who were slowly picking up, after all those injuries. And then the Panthers, who obviously went to the playoffs. I mean, who would win that debacle? I'm also a Guardians fan in the XFL, probably not the Guardians. Like, that's just how I feel. But that's what I would do. I'll probably Guardians Panthers, I think, would be an awesome matchup to see.
That's definitely fair. Evan, what about you, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of intriguing matchups. I think if you wanted to go for a very sort of strength of roster type of matchup, you go with Stallions Defenders. But I think there's a couple more intriguing options. Like one that I was flirting with was maybe Guardians Panthers, or maybe even Guardians Gamblers. Just from what I remember. I feel like the Guardians, and even the Vipers too. I feel like both of those teams, came close to winning on several occasions. And the Vipers, I feel like in particular, could have really flipped their season around. And interesting point by Chris talking about how maybe if they were in the USFL, things would have been different. Just given the strength of certain teams in that league. I definitely agree with that.
That's a whole nother question as well. I mean, the conference alignment in terms of where teams are located, or if them just strictly be leagues. I mean, so many questions. Mark, what's a matchup you want to see?
Give me the two Houston teams, right? The Roughnecks and the Gamblers. I mean, we're talking about Mark Thompson and company. Hopefully he comes back. I don't know. He's kind of throwing out there. They might not be, but would love to see the Gamblers match up against that air raid offense in Houston. I think that would be a pretty exciting matchup. A lot of passing yards. I was really surprised by the release of Terry. My lord, I can't think of anyone's names tonight. Terry Wilson. Yeah, he got released
Didn't
today.
he just get cut? Yeah, the Gamblers cut like a lot of people, and they probably didn't know until James Larson put out the tweet, and they're like, "This is how we found out. Like, this sucks." Yeah.
Yeah. But the Houston teams, I think, would be a really fun matchup. A lot of scoring, I think, in that one.
Chris brings up my thought right here. Battle for Houston. Just let the Roughnecks and the Gamblers play a game, and whoever wins gets to stay in Houston. The other team has to leave.
They get to play in Brazil.
Yeah, relegate them to the Elf.
Yep.
They've relocated to Hamburg.
I think Michael would be very interested with that.
Michael, what's a matchup you'd like to see?
So first and foremost, with everything that happens with these rosters turning over, like speculation is definitely something that is awesome because we got to base it all off of last year. Based off of last year, I would have liked to seen the Breakers and Battlehawks. You know, I mean, I think that would have been a great matchup to see and witness. The Brahmas and the Maulers, I think, had very similar styles, at least early in the year. The Maulers got way better, down the stretch, but at least earlier in the year, those two teams would have meshed up pretty well. Your Stars, as dreadful as that offensive line was, I think that they could have, had a good matchup with the Renegades earlier in the season as well. So,
With Kyle
um,
Sloter.
yeah, Kyle Sloter. Yeah, there's definitely some key matchups that you could see there. It just really would boil down to whether or not these rosters are able. And if a merger does happen, I would be very interested to see if Birmingham was able to maintain their roster structure the same way that they've been able to do as well. Because I don't know if it's just because they dominated one league, but now when you start adding in teams like the Defenders, the champions of the Renegades and stuff like that, some of these players, may want to kind of test the waters elsewhere or whatever it may be. So that will be interesting to see if those rosters are able to turn over at that same rate or whatnot, or maintain that same level of talent as well. So it's going to be interesting because Houston's definitely going to be one to watch for. I unfortunately, as much as I love the Houston Roughnecks name, way better than the Houston Gamblers name, I just think that if the merger does happen, in a sense, with the USFL being the primary branding package, that it will probably be the Gamblers that remain in Houston to some degree. As much as I wish that it would be the Roughnecks, just because I like that name way better.
That's completely fair. Definitely think Roughnecks is a little bit more creative. Chris says, I heard Vipers may become Boulder Gold. I'm not sure where you heard that, my friend, but I would love it. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, though. I've heard, what was it,
American Dream.
Arizona, and was it, man,
Portland. I've heard Portland a lot.
I do.
What was the
I
third
do want to
state?
mention something. Arizona has been the prime, but I want to mention something real quick too, or I want to pose a question to everybody here because geography is a big thing, and speaking of where we are with this, the hybrid system worked well. Now, assuming that they do that, is it possible that the Seattle Sea Dragons end up getting moved? Because right now, with Vegas getting put out of the way, if they move to Arizona or they move to Nashville, if they don't move to Portland, that leaves Seattle as just a lone target up there in the corner by itself, away from a lot of the traveling. Is it possible that the Sea Dragons could get relocated in this situation too, assuming they keep 16 teams and they don't just eliminate some teams? That's one that I'm intrigued by.
I think just in general, it's kind of weird that there's like nothing really on the West Coast. Like there's nothing in Arizona, California, Vegas was the closest, and now they're gone. Like I think overall, it's just interesting. There's nothing really on the West Coast. I know a lot of people say like there's nothing in California because it's too expensive, which is understandable. I would love to see San Diego have a team. Like I think like the last team we had was what, the Fleet, and technically what, Strike Force in the Arena League. And like I would love to see if they can somehow push some out there. Like I did mention, I heard Vipers Portland. So maybe they just like, throw them up in Portland and then they'll make it out with Seattle a little bit. So that's how I would think they do. They just might throw up the Vipers because the Vipers are kind of the wild card in this whole thing. Like if they do cut down teams, they're the first team out because they don't have a home right now. Like I strongly feel that like if any team that could get cut, Vipers could definitely be cut again. So I could say maybe put them out in Portland, and that's probably going to be enough if they keep all the teams.
I will throw out there that keep in mind one thing we don't know that will be changing is the hub in Arlington for the XFL. So if that's the case, I don't know that you're necessarily losing anything by not having another West Coast rival per se. In fact, you might actually be saving some money if you're traveling to Arizona instead of to Vegas or something like that. I'd have to look at the distances between the two locations, but I don't think that it would be a significant change in their overall costs.
But eventually you have to imagine that they're going to break away from the hybrid hub.
100%.
So that's
100%.
why I'm just saying, is it possible that they start producing or planning ahead of time for that, and they move Seattle closer just to get their, kind of like their ducks in a row, whatever that saying is. That doesn't make sense to me, but you know what I mean? Like, if they just get themselves lined up for that situation. Now, obviously it's all speculation at this point, but I just was thinking about it geographically, it just doesn't line up with me.
Absolutely. We got a USFL supporter in the chat that is very, very firmly against the XFL. Kind of funny to see still that's happening, but hey, it's all right. Everybody's got their own preference. I get it to a certain extent, but to call the XFL trash and that Birmingham would beat most teams by 3 touchdowns, I don't know about that.
I'm a Birmingham guy. I don't think they would be beating them by 3 touchdowns. I don't think we'd be like that, for sure.
Maybe
but
if it was
we could beat them.
Maybe if it was like Birmingham versus early season Orlando, like maybe that was a 3 touchdown.
And Vegas, and Renegades. I could keep going.
Yeah, there's a couple teams for sure, but
no way. The Vipers would beat Birmingham.
In early Vipers though. That's what I was kind of going off of. Really.
You could have said just Vipers in general. Like, the whole season was just.
It's true, but I feel like early Vipers was hard to watch just in general for me.
Okay, he says just teasing the fresh meat for the new league. Okay, cool.
That's fair.
I can respect that, as long as you're not just completely hating on the XFL for no reason, for lack of.
Some people do that. It is what it is.
Yes, a lot of people do that. Is there any final thoughts from anybody that we haven't covered yet? I know we kind of got to a little bit of everything tonight. Wasn't really anything necessarily on the docket that I wanted to discuss. So any final thoughts from anybody? Let's just go ahead.
Yeah, so I kind of how I mentioned it in the chat warning about like the arena leagues and stuff and how this affects it. Pull up.
Oh, we got one.
I don't want to waste time, man. I don't want to waste time.
In the words of Krish, we have a Shady Sports Network historical moment, because Krish has never been left speechless on camera.
Never.
Hey, no, all seriousness though, I appreciate you calling me out. That's the first time I've been called out like that. So
humble.
That shows I'm moving up in the ranks. But my biggest thing is, like I said about the arena leagues, right? When you look at the arena leagues, how does this affect it, right? What type of players? Now, Evan, you're involved with the Las Vegas Nighthawks. So my question to you is, when you evaluate players for the Nighthawks, how did this merger affect the quality of players you're able to get? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I touched on it a bit earlier, but I think a point that I didn't talk about, and one of the things that really right now is something that I did think about today when this news first came out, especially for me, is a lot of people won't look at this because it's not necessarily a glaring thing amongst all the questions that people are going to have. But obviously the IFL and the XFL have a player partnership going now. They've developed a relationship, a partnership where both leagues are able to benefit off a system. When I was out in Vegas for the IFL XFL Combine, and ultimately that event was a success. Brahmas were there, Battlehawks were there. Obviously a couple players, MVP TJ Edwards to the San Antonio Brahmas, and then a couple guys from Quad City, Joe Crawl, CJ Wyndham over to the Brahmas as well. So I look at that and I think, now that there's actually that partnership is starting to gain a bit of momentum, what's going to happen to that? Because if, the two leagues merge, XFL and USFL, like the USFL didn't have a partnership with the IFL. Now, I'm sure they're familiar of the IFL and what it brings. And there are, players who have been in the USFL that have gone to the IFL and vice versa. But I just wonder if that partnership will still exist or if it'll change. I don't really have any information on that at this time. But to answer your question, Chris, again, man, when it comes to player personnel and evaluation, if they stick to that February to May schedule, it would be nice to, in May, if there's a couple guys, that are available, that perhaps want to come play arena football, that they can go and do that. Now, I said earlier as well, the real, if let's say they go from, a full 16 teams to 12 and a couple guys, from those teams that are removed from the league aren't picked up by other teams in this new league, that makes it convenient for me because then, I can just try and get these guys in arena, if they're interested. But if not, I feel like there'll still be a lot of rosters filled up and, there won't be as many available free agents. And, again, too, another question that, we can all speculate is, maybe they decide to add practice squads, or something. Maybe if they really want to build the league and grow it, maybe you want to increase roster sizes. I know in the USFL specifically, roster size was something that a lot of people wanted to change. There was people saying it was too small. You need more active players on game days. Guys go down due to injury and you don't have enough you don't have enough spots to fill in. You kind of got to shuffle guys around, and some dudes might end up playing out of position. So there's a lot again to think about there. But in the IFL, I mean, we're focused on. I have players that I'm interested in that are free agents, and obviously, I believe some of them will get picked up, by an outdoor league. But if not, I can help them come play. Hopefully for my team. If not, maybe another team if it's more convenient. But ultimately, man, I think that's where we're at on that.
Definitely.
My thing is, what does this look like on the business side of things? What does the infrastructure look like? Because it's got to make money. I mean, that's how you survive. So what are we doing for ticket sales? What are we doing to increase our efforts, especially on the USFL side? I mean, my Lord. Like, there was no infrastructure in place for that on the USFL side of things. The XFL side of things, you can step it up, man. Like, the ticket sales side of things this year, Vegas was an embarrassment. There were a couple locations that were not up to par and could have been easily if there was more of a focus and effort on that front, on the marketing front. So what are we going to do to step that up? Because ultimately you have to make money to survive. And it's not just about the performance on the field. It's about how you're marketing and selling the product off the field as well.
If anybody would know about that marketing part of it, you would definitely be the person to talk to. So just saying, USFL, if you're watching, give this man a call. He's got lots of good advice, I'm sure. So might want to offer him a job, just saying. But any final thoughts from you, Michael or Pierce?
I just want to say the Stars just re-signed Luis Aguilar.
I
didn't know if you
I better get to work.
Didn't know if you saw that or not. From my end, no, I said pretty much what I need to say, and I don't want to repeat and beat a dead horse or anything because it's just obviously we just got to keep in mind here that even though this merger, or the rumors of a merger, there's still nothing official as far as that is concerned, and we still need to hear what the details are going to be for the league, how they're going to go about rebranding it and packaging it. The USFL obviously is still selling hub tickets in their locations. The XFL just posted again today about going to get season tickets for next year. So both these leagues are still operating in the off season as they gear up for the following year in that sense. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it, and as more news has trickled out or whatever, we'll get an idea. Hopefully, it's the right decision. That's my biggest thing. Is hopefully it's the right decision and it's not too soon. But with that being said, I'm sure that the business proposal that Mark was talking about is definitely was laid out to benefit both leagues. And on top of this, the other thing that none of us have really thought about is maybe possibly a 12-team league instead of a 16-team league. So they X out 4 of the teams, probably 2 from the USFL, 2 of the XFL, and maybe go from there. That's a possibility too. But I would expect that once the merger is complete, if it does go all the way through, that we will see an extended spring season, maybe by 3 to 4 games. And so we'll probably still get roughly the same amount of football. It'll just be staggered and not as long as we would have liked.
That's completely probable if this happens. I will throw out there, Andy Paul Murray came up with this idea long before I ever even dreamed of it. But adding a bye week could be a good idea. You add a bye week, you rotate some teams, you can extend the season a week artificially without having to actually play an extra game. It's not going to cost you any extra money as the XFL or the USFL. Players are going to be off. Maybe you give them a time at home or something like that. But whatever you may do, I think a bye week makes a lot of sense, especially if you extend past 10 games. You're kind of putting these guys through the ringer if they're playing 10 games, 12 games, and then you go into a 3-game playoff series and a championship game. You might be playing 15, 16 games without a bye week. That's a little bit much, so I definitely think that's something they should consider for sure. Pierce, any final thoughts from you, buddy?
Yeah, so I'm on the PFN Discord. USFL guys, XFL guys, they're all there, and a lot of them bring up like possibly doing a draft, kind of like a fantasy draft of sorts, where like everybody just gets reset. They're not on the teams they were on, and then they just draft them out. It's interesting because I'm a Stallions guy. I don't want to do that. Like, I feel comfortable where a roster is. Maybe get some more linebackers and wide receivers now feel a bit more comfortable. But I ultimately like where our team's heading. Like, we're building a solid team that's being successful 2 seasons now. While the XFL, they've only got 1 season, and they lost a lot of people over the offseason. So that's the USFL. So I'm not a huge thing about the draft, just fantasy draft style like in Madden. So I'm just curious of how you guys think about it. Just like, should we just blow it up and then draft who is on teams and then new guys, or should we just keep it how it is for all the teams?
I mean, my personal thought, I say you keep it how it is. Let these teams build off of what they've already done. It's going to be more competitive in that way, in my personal opinion. But I'm curious to hear everybody else's opinions on that as well. Evan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, I definitely understand, a reset to some degree, but I think, again, logistically, that would just be so difficult. And, the XFL has already claimed rights to players that aren't necessarily under contract, so that could get really messy. If you've got a bunch of guys that, are claimed by a team, or, their rights are with a team, but because they haven't signed a contract, that just kind of disappears. Like that would feel like a waste, of resources and time. And I'll tell you right now, man, from the personnel perspective, like there are plenty of free agents that you can bring in if you feel like your team is not, where it needs to be. Yes, it's nice to pull from the existing player pool where guys are already proven. You've been able to see what they do at that level, but I feel like there will be a motive if these leagues merge to sort of push the player development aspect further. There might be more of a drive to go find some hidden talent and some guys. It will drive, I think, some of the personnel people to look harder. And I can vouch for that because that's my business now. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think logistically it makes sense to do that. So I don't have a whole lot to say other than just echoing, what has already been said. But I think you keep the teams the way it is and roll with it and see who comes back and see who you have to add to fill out your roster.
Agreed. Michael, your thoughts?
I think the only way that you really can do it is if you contract a league. Like if you go down to 10 or 12 teams and you eliminate 4 to 6 of them or whatever it may be, like I think it would be the only way that a full reset could really work. I don't really think that that's a good idea personally, but I would prefer them to just build upon what they've already built on. But if you do eliminate teams, I mean, you're eliminating players, you're eliminating coaches, you're eliminating personnel, assistants, coordinators, stuff like that. So those guys can be negotiated as far as the coordinators and stuff are. But what are you going to do with those players? Now they're out of contract. Maybe if you eliminate those teams, put those guys into a player pool, maybe draft off that. Another thing to keep an eye on is Lindsey Scott was drafted to the USFL and the XFL. So what's going to happen there as far as who's going to get the rights there? Because technically he was drafted to the USFL first, but I mean, do you honor that? So they definitely have some details to figure out as far as that would be concerned. But I would have liked to see them just build upon what they're building upon. But if they are constricting, if they do decide to eliminate 4, teams or 6 teams or whatever it may be, I'd like to see those players get a chance to get drafted to the current teams, because that would be, I think, the most fair approach, because the players aren't asking for them to be constricted, right? The players aren't asking for them to be eliminated. Personnel's like coordinators and stuff, coaches, they're not asking for their jobs to be eliminated if you do that. So, but like we see with mergers all the time, we just saw it with the WWE and UFC. 100 people in the office got laid off for TKO group, holdings. So it happens, unfortunately. So I would like to see a draft of that nature in that capacity, but not a full reset.
I will say, I do think, like, one of my theories is the Guardians are one of the teams that get cut down if they do. And if that happens, Andrew Jamil, I want him at Birmingham. We need some wide receivers, Marlon Williams, Myron Mitchell, Andrew Jamil would be unstoppable. But that's just a theory, because, it's all speculation in the end. But that's my future.
There's nothing but speculation at this point. There isn't a whole lot to go off of. So this was definitely a fun exercise. I appreciate everybody for tuning in and coming on and talking about a bunch of thoughts, basically, because that's all this boils down to at this point. Just to be clear that we're all going off the article that came out this morning on Sportico that mentioned that this league merger could be coming as soon as next week. So if you have not checked out that article, make sure you go do it. Great article. They do great work on Sportico. They seem to be ahead of the curve a lot of the time. So make sure to give them their due. With all that being said, thank you so much, everybody who came on tonight, everybody who's no longer with us currently. Thanks, Mark, Evan, Pierce, appreciate it. Michael, always appreciate everything you do for us, man. Thank you so much. And with that being said, we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Thank you.
As soon as I can find the outro.
I'm a game changer. I'm a game changer.